feels like all season had been building to this episode and to that devastating, fantastic, raw, painful conversation between Robbie and Duke. But something that stands out leading up to it is Duke's insistence that he fix Robbie's bike. Is that because he can see in Robbie what's really going on, like what he then will admit in that conversation, that he doesn't know if he wants to be here anymore and he just wants to have that opportunity to speak to him again?
Yes, and I see Duke as someone, and it's Duke talks about, and I don't know how much of this is left in the episode, but Duke talks about having been around death and been close to death, and I think he's been in the darkness, he's been in despair, he's been in hopelessness, and he sees it in Robbie's eyes, and he doesn't want to get in his way, but he's at a place in his life where he just doesn't want to, let any BS slide. It's just like, what's going on? And let's be real about it. Don't shine me on. And he understands where Robbie is, but he also, he wants to offer something that he's learned along the way that Robbie hasn't learned yet.
At what point did Duke know he'd have to confront Robbie head on, do you think?
I think he probably knows it from the beginning. And it's probably one of the reasons, one of the ways he talked himself into actually showing up for the tests. That it's not about me. It's about him. And I just know a lot of people, probably myself included, who can find ways of doing things for others that they're not willing to do for themselves. I think it's very much about that.
Was Robbie saying that the hospital is the only place that he can be, about having purpose and being able to be distracted in there, more surprising to Duke than Robbie admitting that he's thinking about suicide and doesn't know if he wants to be here anymore?
I think that they're just different angles on the same equation. The idea of my only value is in what I'm doing signals a lack of recognition of or value in my being. And that lack of valuing of my being is the precursor to suicide. I don't matter.
What is he seeing in Robbie in that scene, like as Robbie is admitting this stuff to him, and then also he's then going back inside, he's leaving the conversation. So like, what is Duke seeing in him?
He's seeing the desperation of no good solution, the recognition in Robbie of seeing no way out of his present circumstance, no way to deal with the way it feels to be him. And that helplessness and hopelessness is, it's the dark night of the soul. It's the bottom that someone has to hit before they're willing to have a change of heart, willing to have a change in the way they are approaching their life. And he's seeing that, and it's a really dangerous place, because the bottom might be past the point of death, or the bottom might be just before that point of death. And of course, that's what he's hoping for is, come on, wake up.
What do you think it is about Duke that Robbie is able to be that honest with him in that conversation? Is it that time they've been spending together with the motorcycles? Does that play into it?
The spending the time with the motorcycles and not having to, be anything for each other, I think is a lot of it. And also I think Duke is just completely non-judgmental. And he doesn't need anything from Robbie. And everyone in the world needs something from Robbie. Even his nurse, his main nurse, needs him to be Robbie, needs him to stay alive. And Duke just goes, "You do what you got to do, man." And that, that there's a thing about challenging situations in a life. If someone else is the voice of no and you're in trouble, all you can think of is yes, or vice versa. So for someone to just step away and go like, "Man, whatever you need to do, man," allows a breath to be taken, allows an experience to be available that isn't when everyone's pushing at you.
Talk about filming that scene with Noah, because I feel like that scene is like Emmy reel material for both of you.
Oh, oh, thank you. He's just Noah's amazing. He just brings so much expertise and wisdom about the whole experience of television to the equation, and then he has this big heart, and he lets himself go all in. And as an actor, it's rare to have that, and I really had that with him. He let himself be present, so we got to really discover the scene, and then discover it again, and then discover it again, and find out all the colors of it, all the nooks and crannies of it. It was just I could have stayed there and done that scene for another day.
I mean, it's just simply great television. That's like what you want when you watch a TV show. You want a scene like that.
Oh, God bless you for saying so. Thank you. I'm glad it came out.
So does Duke think that he got through to Robbie at all? Because then notice that Duke follows him inside. We see him in the background while Robbie's then lecturing the EMTs about the previous patient.
And I feel like that's with Duke there, then Robbie gets to witness where he is from a different perspective. And that's really what he needs, is a breaking out of the narrow perspective he has into this other way that he can see himself through Duke's eyes in that moment, and Duke is reflecting back to him the genius of what he is in this world, and the value that he is in this world.
It seems like everyone's just having a really rough day, like on this shift. We see in 14, because we see the conversation that Robbie has with Duke outside when he admits, "I don't know if I want to be here anymore." That's not something that those inside are privy to, but they've also seen the way that he's reacting to patients. Santos sees the way he reacts to the EMTs who didn't put the leads on the patient the right way. How much is she seeing in Robbie what's going on with him, and how much is it like she just has so much going on herself?
I think because she's kind of latched on to him a bit. I think because he's one of the few people who knows what happened with Langdon, and also like listened to her. I think that's a very intoxicating thing when you haven't been believed before. For a person of authority to believe you is really powerful. And so I think she likes having him around and looks up to him a lot. But a lot of the time, the people we look up to are very flawed people. And I think she's witnessing the facade breaking in the last couple episodes and seeing like, oh, I think he's doing just as poorly as I am. Like, I think we actually might be going through the exact same thing. And that's even scarier to when you kind of lose the person that you've put on a pedestal and you realize they're just a broken human being too. Like, that's really, really scary. And yeah, I think it's pushing her. It makes her feel even more isolated.
It's in this episode, it's the first time that Robbie actually like verbally says, like, "I don't know if I want to be here." And that's one of, I think, the most like raw, painful conversation of the entire like season so far. Yeah. What was your reaction to reading that in the script?
I mean, honestly, episode 14 of the first season when he has his breakdown, I believe it was 14, with his stepson. Um, there was that moment, and then this moment was the first, another crack in the surface that you really see him speak and spill, you know? And when I read that in the script, it was kind of like it's kind of like an overflow of emotions of just, the whole show's building to this moment for Robbie to, I mean, for him to say, I don't want to be here anymore. There's the answer for the audience, but also there's the the shift in what all the signs have meant coming up to this point. Um, but I think it's really, when I first read it, I thought it was really nice and touching that they were talking about really the mental health of a person that's been through this much, seen this much, has lost this much, and is still choosing to stand here and every single day and help people. Is of course he'll crack and overflow, and so it's just to see. My question when I first read it was, what happens after? Like, does anybody step up? Does Abbott do something? What is somebody going to get in his way? Is Dana going to get in his way? So, but yeah.
Yeah, because we're seeing how each member of the staff is dealing with exactly the same thing that Robbie is. Everyone just has a different way of doing it. Like Mateo might be the fact that night shift might be where he needs to be in
Sure.
order to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like that with everybody in life. It's everybody has different responses and different coping strategies. And but with the comments and nuggets that Noah's leaving, it's concerning. And so when he finally says, I don't want to be here, I don't want to be doing this anymore," it's I think I think a lot of characters in the show are probably strangely gonna follow Robbie's path if they don't, like he's trying to teach them and help them and say, like he said to Mohan in episode 11 of this hospital is your force field, like keep everything out. It's like that was something that he didn't do or anything like that, and he allowed things to come in. And so I think it's a warning, I think, for a lot of the doctors and nurses and people in the hospitals, like, you got to have your outlet, for sure.
How is Mateo with that? Like on a scale of like 1 to 10, how is he at keeping things out like that?
I think Mateo does a really good job of keeping his life outside of the ER. And I think, of course, I think with anybody, there's a blend of when you experience certain things, and of course, doctors and nurses and people in the emergency medical field see crazy things that are going to bleed into their everyday life. But I think Mateo has a good grasp and a good balance of keeping arm's distance from things at the hospital. I think he does a fine job because he's able to stay mellow and secure and 2 feet on the ground throughout the whole day. So yeah, I think he has a good grasp. I think he goes home, plays video games, watches TV. I don't know. I think he's got a good routine going on.
We see just how tough it is on Mohan to have Orlando back in the ER like he is in 213 and 214, like those two episodes for her. And this is also very much a continuation of the conversations that she and Robbie have had thus far, the shift with Mohan checking if him seeing how she is a trick question. It kind of feels like she's just a bit raw with everything going on, right? Like if someone's checking in with her at this point in 214, she doesn't really know if she can trust it, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think especially because of how you responded to that, to the panic attack, it's just a little like, are you really asking? Are you really making space for me to answer? I also, as an actor, had a really interesting response to 214. It was at the end of 213, Samira has this moment where she leaves the hospital and kind of has this moment outside where she cries, and it makes sense that she would leave. I think as that type of character, I think she's someone who doesn't really want to cry in the workplace and does whatever she can to prevent that from happening. And I remember starting to film 214 and realizing that, she would have cried right before coming in. And I just had this insanely emotional response before filming the scene, where Lauren also just did such an incredible job. But it's like, as the doctor in that moment, you need to zip it up and can't really have the reaction, the level of reaction that the patient is having. So it would be this really strange thing where, like, in between takes, I'd be
I'd be like sobbing, and then I would like zip it up as the camera would start rolling. And I remember once we finished filming that scene, Lauren, who plays Mrs. Diaz, we took like a selfie together, being like, we just cried our eyes out for like 2 hours straight. We should get we're probably dehydrated. We should get some water.
But it's not just the Robbie of it. It's kind of like, I don't know if she would be really in the place at this point to talk to anyone about Orlando, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think his response in 214, where he says he should have jumped, like I think where he says like he should have picked a higher floor. I forget exactly what he says, but essentially saying he should have tried harder to hurt himself. I think like that's really the moment for Samira where she's like what is going on with you? And the wife's right there. Why would you say that right in front of her? And I think really this moment of her realizing something's like really wrong with him, or not wrong, but something's like not right. And uh, maybe he needs help. But I also think it is that moment of her realizing that maybe he is projecting something onto her that is really to do with his own stuff.
And it's like everyone is really going through it this shift, I feel like, where it's like Dana's going through it. So it's not even like Mohan can talk to Dana. We see Santos is going through it, not really going to talk to Langdon just came back. It's like everyone has their own thing that they're going through, and they're kind of all going through it by themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think sometimes when hits the fan for you, you tend to isolate a little bit more. I think especially as people in professions like these that are high stress, I think sometimes it's interesting. I was speaking to a resident doctor, and she always said that she could tell that something was off in terms of how she was handling her stress and how the mental health was affecting her profession when she would isolate. And I think those moments in the show really, really played true to that.
Who would she feel comfortable opening up to at this point?
Probably McKay. I think it's strange because you think that they're the same level or McKay's her superior, but I think there's a little bit of comfort she takes in that McKay is, an R3 compared to her R4, but also is like someone who has more life experience than her. So I think that is like a sort of dynamic that she feels a little bit more comfortable with. Maybe even Dr. Al-Hashimi. It might be a little bit more, from like a mentorship angle to talk to her about how she deals with things like that. But I think just in terms of a frank conversation, I feel like she feels more comfortable, feeling like she doesn't need to necessarily go to a superior, because I think already throughout the shift, she's had so many, instances of Robbie in particular picking at her ability to be at the ER, whether she is a good ER doctor, all of those things. And I think, she is someone that would internalize that and feel like she doesn't want to talk to her other superiors about like the struggles she's facing.
And also at this point is when we're starting to get into what's going on with Al-Hashimi too. So it's like another thing of everyone has something.
There's like a whole other thing going on there. And I think Seppi just does such beautiful work bringing this character to life. It was really such a pleasure to watch her work on set those last few episodes.
Mohan says she could have been more persuasive, and Robbie's response isn't the best there. But that aside, does Mohan really think that there's anything else she could have done, or is it just that she wishes she could have convinced him to stay? Because she really did do everything I think that she could have. He wasn't going to stay.
Yeah, I think as an audience member, that, but I think as her, she doesn't. I think she feels like there's just more she could have done. And, I've talked about her backstory a bit more in the press this season. She has this trauma from losing her dad because of a gap in care and someone not stepping in enough. And it really is her worst nightmare to be in the position of that doctor now. I think she always, her entire medical career, just went like, no matter what, I am not going to be that doctor that said I didn't do enough. And I think she just thinks that regardless of how true it is, that now she is in that position. And she didn't do enough. She didn't do enough to help this person.
This has been a rough shift for Santos. Is any part of her not upset to be stuck at work charting at this point? Like with everything she's been through, might it not be the best idea for her to go home, or does she really just need to get out of the hospital?
I think, she does her complaining as anyone does. I love when I see people be like, God, she's so terrible. She's like complaining all the time. I'm like, do you not complain at work? I complain constantly. It doesn't matter if I'm happy to be there. I'm still gonna be like, wait.
And she also does the work though too. Like she'll complain.
She also does the work. It's just like anyone. But she does her complaining. But I also, I think there's a bit of like, she knows the danger of what it would be to go home and be alone. And I think part of her kind of self-preservation instinct is like, if I stay here, that won't happen. And I think, is kind of scared to go home alone to an empty house when she's gotten used to having like a little buddy around. She would never admit that, but I think she's scared to go home alone. So she can complain about it, but I think she kind of needs to be charting.
How much of Duke's backstory do you know? Because he mentions that he's done things he's not proud of, bad things, hurt people on purpose and himself, and did his time, but we don't get specific details. So how much did you get?
I got what you got, and then made up the rest, and drew from whatever experiences I've had that are in the direction of, and I thought about my cousin who passed away last year, and
sorry for your loss.
And thank you. And he was a really good man, and it's hard to be a good man in this world, and to carry the weight of what some lives call upon us to do.
Then there's Duke's own health, an ascending aortic aneurysm. He needs surgery if he wants to live. At this point, though, Duke says he has to sit with it for a minute. What is he weighing? Because you would think that being told what he is, you can understand he might be worried about the surgery, but it does seem like he's almost leaning towards, what, maybe I'm not going to do this.
It's just so beautiful that they wrote it like that, isn't it? Because it sounds like a lot, and it sounds like a lot of recovery to have to go through. And I think Duke he's not going to just make a knee-jerk decision of, well, of course I want to live. There has to be the weighing of, what am I living for? And does it matter enough for me to go through what I need to go through? And I don't know how conscious he is of asking himself those questions, but I think those are the questions he's asking. He's someone who's, I don't think he has anyone at home waiting for him. I don't think he has children who are depending on him. I don't even think he has a pet. He needs to keep fed. So what's the point? And not like, what's the point just in a rhetorical sense, but truly, what is the point? And am I willing to step into a next chapter of life that involves this kind of recovery?
Maybe the first step is to getting a cat or a dog.
or even a plant, right?